Good morning, eighth graders. Happy Thursday. Hope everyone's doing well. You guys did an awesome job. Almost every single one of you checked in on my bell ringer. I talked to a couple of you yesterday and during my Google Meet at 10:30. So it looks like everyone's doing pretty well. Feel free to continue to email me if you have any questions. Um, so for today, what I have us doing is the bell ringer on Google Classroom, watching this video for the notes on War of 1812. We're going to continue working through this packet. We're not going to finish it today. Usually with like how I set out our schedule for the next 3 weeks on the whiteboard on Friday, I always said that we would do kind of like an activity on Thursdays, and then I would set like time aside for homework on Fridays. But since we did not have Monday and Tuesday this week for online or remote learning, I am going to um, spend a little bit more time on this packet, and then next week I'll definitely do more of like an activity on Thursday, and then give you a little bit more time for homework on Friday. So make sure that you're completing that packet. It is due tomorrow, and then you're doing the exit and the check-in. Just as a reminder, make sure you're doing both the bell ringer and the exit ticket. It's how I'm taking like attendance for this like extended break. So the exit ticket for yesterday: what were the impacts of the embargo on American ships? Was it positive or negative, and why? Almost every single one of you got this right. If not every single one of you, that it was a negative impact. It had bad effects on the economy, on unemployment. It was really negative because it stopped the imports and exports of things going in and out on American merchant ships. So definitely have like embargo. That's a good keyword that would pop up on like a state test in high school, or something that you're expected to know, especially as you move on through your like American history and history classes throughout the high school. So the bell ringer for today: do you think that General William Henry Harrison had the right to storm Prophetstown? Why or why not? So go back to your notes and kind of look at that. Then it was on the first page talking about. It's actually the bottom of the first page and the top of the second page talking about Governor of Indiana Territory General William Henry Harrison and his decision to storm Prophetstown. I remember that the prophet was Tecumseh's brother. So look back at those notes, answer that. Please do complete sentences. I believe in you guys. All right, so moving on. I'll give you a second to get out your notes. We are going to move on to the Warhawks. We're going to finish the end of the second page and a little bit of the third page today, and then we will continue finishing these notes tomorrow in a video. So I'm just going to go ahead and start. So the Warhawks were a group of young Republicans from the South and the West that were really aggressive and really pushing James Madison to move towards declaring war with Britain. So at this time, I want you to keep in mind in the back of your head that Britain is currently fighting a war with France still. So remember, we talked about Napoleon Bonaparte. That was a part of your notes from last week. So currently, Britain is already in a war with France. So just keep that in the back of your mind as we talk about the United States potentially declaring a war against Britain as well, and how that would impact Britain fighting two wars simultaneously for a little bit of this time. So they were really aggressive. They wanted policy against Britain. They were still upset with um, Britain Navy impressment and them taking over their ships, affecting their trade. Obviously, the economy is really struggling after the embargo. The Native Americans are starting to align themselves with Britain. So definitely Henry Clay and John Calhoun, who are the two leaders of the Warhawks, were very much pushing for a declaration of war. They also wanted to increase a lot of spending on military. Remember, we had previous presidents that were trying to increase spending on our ships or our navy. So increasing that spending on military was definitely one of the biggest um, talking points or viewpoints or mission statements for Henry Clay and John Calhoun. So, using patriotism and nationalism. Those of you that don't know nationalism, that is like loyalty to one's country. So, being very patriotic and being very much supporting the needs of your country and thinking that your country is above all. That is that is their marketing point, or their way of convincing people that, oh yes, our country is the best country, it is the strongest country. There is no way that any other country would go against us and win. They are coming off of a victory of Tecumseh and the Native Americans, so they're obviously feeling very strong at this point. So, using patriotism and nationalism, the Warhawks heightened war fever throughout the nation. So, coming up with that, we need to go to war, we need to fight, we need to show that we are the strongest and the best. So, they really believed that with this war, Britain would bring more territorial gains. So, think of that manifest destiny and that gaining more ground, more land to absorb into the United States. So they wanted Canada and Spanish Florida because at this point, Florida is still Spanish territory. So think about the United States map that we've looked at in the past. It's no longer just that 13 colonies side. On the east, it is the Louisiana Purchase territory, and we're trying to gain as well Canada and Florida. So Canada, especially, was a very profitable piece of land because Canada was incredibly fertile at this point. So gaining that would be really potentially beneficial for farmers and people that make their income through crops and growing things. So that was their main goal, is wanting to gain Canada and Spanish Florida. So through Congress, the Warhawks quadrupled the size of the U.S. Army. So making sure that Army was growing, gaining new recruits, things like that. Um, but as we'll talk about here in a little bit, the size of the army at this point was not that large to begin with. So we're going to talk about the numbers in the army and then kind of which type of individuals are making up this army at this point. So hold on to that thought. So war is declared. This is the first time ever in the United States. I mean, ever. This is the first time in 1812 that war is declared. So that is why this is called the War of 1812. This is the first war that was ever declared on June 18th. It is declared against Britain. It was approved by Congress. It was James Madison's decision, and kind of on like the down low, people would refer this war as Mr. Madison's War. So it would not be a quick war as the Warhawks expected. They assumed with their nationalism and their patriotism and their new strength in the United States Army that this would be a quick war. It would be a quick defeat. They would gain the Spanish territory and the British territory in Canada. Native Americans would continue to move back and allow them to gain their territory without objection. But that was 100% not the case, and it lasted for almost 3 years, which was not something that the United States was prepared for. So the battles began in July of 1812 with American generals Hull and Harrison trying to take Canada, but would fail with the British control in Lake Erie. So, real quick, let's go back to talking about what is making up this military at this point. The old or regular Army of the United States in 1812 made up of 12,000 soldiers, 5,000 of them being brand new recruits. So I want you to think about how these 12,000 soldiers would have been very prepared, very trained, but the 5,000 new ones might have been less prepared, less on the side of being able to be super beneficial in strength to this new army. There was also between 50,000 and 100,000 state militia. So remember when we talked about state militia and how these were people that were bringing their own weapons, no uniforms, not regulated United States military supplies or uniforms. So think about that as to how they're preparing. But if you want to say that there's strength in numbers, then yes, the United States military looked like overwhelming and a lot. But based on who was actually able to use military strategy and strength and kind of have that ability to lead, might have been fewer than anticipated. At this point, the Americans had already surrendered Detroit and Michigan, so the Battle of Lake Erie was the biggest goal, to go and gain Lake Erie from British control at this point. And that is when Oliver Hazard Perry, who is a vocab term, comes into play. He was the commander of the Lake Erie Naval Forces, so his orders were to seize control of the lake from Britain and make sure that there was no other advances, no more surrenders of any other land, no more taking over or gaining that territory that was already gained by the United States. So not losing any more of that. And remember that as Britain is fighting, they are still continuing to have Native American support. So it is not just Britain that America is fighting at this point. It is their allies that are the Native Americans. And remember that they had some strong military tactics as well, along with Tecumseh. So, the Battle of Lake Erie. The Battle of Lake Erie happened on September 10th, 1813, 1 year after the war started, or a little over a year after the war started. This was a pretty bloody and brutal battle, but it did end in the victory of the Americans. Lots of soldiers were lost, lots of land was destroyed, but it was a victory in the Americans. And remember that war cry from the Warhawks, that nationalism, that patriotism starts regaining strength. So the need for war and the need to be victorious and the need to be successful again is growing and growing. Oliver Hazard Perry sent this note to General Harrison, which was known um, pretty often in history and in textbooks. They recite this quote a lot. We have met the enemy and they are ours. So that was kind of a pretty powerful quote and something that was taken down in history as the success of the Battle of Lake Erie. We have met the enemy and they are ours. So, victories for the U.S. By the end of 1813, the U.S. was winning battles on sea and on land, which was pretty surprising based on how unprepared our military was, how long this battle was lasting, how strong Britain was. But remember, again, while Britain might have been had numbers and strength and maybe a more trained military, they were also fighting something in France. So their military was divided, and their funding was, I'm sure, running very, very low. In the Battle of the Thames in October, Tecumseh was killed, marking the eventual defeat of the Native American Confederacy. So remember, we talked about yesterday how Tecumseh was the one that created this union, this confederacy, this togetherness of the Native Americans into fighting one cause of maintaining their territory, maintaining their land, and no longer allowing the white settlers to invade. But with the death of Tecumseh, that all kind of fell apart. There was no longer a confederacy, no longer a union, and that really shattered that ally for Britain. So Britain was kind of more on their own. They no longer had the Native American Confederacy to back them and to use as a potential, um, like a potential benefit for them or an advantage. So British attacked Washington D.C. When we go to Washington D.C., we will see they will talk about if we end up getting to tour the White House or if we have a tour guide. They will kind of discuss what has changed between what was burnt down during the attack of Washington D.C. On August 24th, 1814, the British sailed up Chesapeake Bay and attacked Washington. So this is where they burned every building that had to do with any government entity of the United States. Their tactic was to destroy our government with fire and every material thing that they could find. So all documents were attempted to be burned. The president's mansion was burned. The Capitol building was burned. So we lost a lot of history with this burning in August 24th, 1814. Um, it is incredible to see the restorations, what they attempted to preserve from the original mansion in the Capitol. It is really, really incredible. We will talk about that when we go to DC for sure. But they tried to take away every document they could find, everything that they could just burn up to destroy the United States or weaken the United States. They did. And it's kind of crazy because Mother Nature took a moment to offer some kind of relief and started a thunderstorm right at this time on August 24th. And what would not have been able to be taken out fire wise by, I mean, firefighters at this point were carrying buckets. I mean, hoses were not really something that was, there's no fire hydrants. So this thunderstorm that came down was able to put out all these fires and kind of preserve what was left. But this point, they saw the British idea was to see the home base of the Americans and just kind of set it ablaze. So this is where we're going to leave off. I also want to make a point at this point in 1814, as before we go, and I want you to think about this as we move forward in our notes, is that Britain is no longer fighting France at this point. They are all of a sudden now completely focused on the war on the United States. So that is definitely a disadvantage because what was once divided is now 100% fully focused. All their military, all their naval ships, all their tactics are being focused on the United States of America. So think about that as we move forward. For today, yes, please finish your exit ticket, keep working on your homework, type that in and submit that to me. And if you need anything else, I will be on Google Meet at 10:30, or you can always send me an email or a Google Hangout. All right, guys, have a good day, and we will talk tomorrow.